We have been reading what could be easily called one of the most important passages from Sri Aurobindo's writings with regard to the transformation of the physical consciousness. In this, he gives us a key, the key by which we can consciously bring that physical consciousness out of its semi-conscious or subconscious condition and make conscious all of its automatic processes, all of its automatism, as he calls it. And the sentence we had been reading, if the mind can take up and control the instincts and automatisms of the life energy and the subtle physical consciousness and the body, if it can enter into them, consciously use, and as we may say, fully mentalize their instinctive or spontaneous action, the perfection of these energies, their action too becomes more conscious and more aware of itself and more perfect. And we saw how much this simple sentence carries in terms of practical knowledge and means, methods and approaches to developing the body consciousness. Beyond this, he says that the physical consciousness in the limits of the present evolution is able to be molded by the mind, and it is possible for the mind to extend its control of this physical consciousness to capacities which can barely be limited even in the present status of our evolution. But if that mental consciousness now opens to something still higher, to a higher intuition, and opens to a luminous energy of an intuitive will, then the limits of what it can do with the physical consciousness are completely freed. There is even, he says, under certain circumstances, the possibility of an intervention by the will in the automatic working even of the bodily organs. We saw in this the various stages of how the mind enters in relation with the life force, the subtle physical, and then the gross physical, and begins first to take up and then control the instincts and automatisms, and then it can enter into them, consciously use them, mentalize them, and even intuitivize them as it itself becomes more and more intuitive. We saw the various stages, degrees, and issues relating to this process. There are two passages from the Synthesis of Yoga which we can refer to now in relation to this process, and which will help us to further understand what this involves. These are passages which belong to the portion, the part of the Synthesis of Yoga, which is dealing with the yoga of integral knowledge. In this, Sri Aurobindo outlines the framework of the yoga of knowledge, but even as he outlines that, he puts it in, he presents it as a potential starting point for the integral yoga itself. As you are aware, Sri Aurobindo uses the yoga of works, the yoga of knowledge, and the yoga of love, karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga, as a triple starting point for the integral yoga proper and the yoga of self-perfection. So even as he deals with these three in the Synthesis of Yoga, he does not deal with them merely as they are traditionally known or taught. He shows how They cover certain stages, parts, and processes of the overall movement of yoga, but he points out where in the traditional system there is a shortfall and how that shortfall can be corrected and brought into alignment with the integral yoga itself, with the yoga of self perfection. And so, at various points, even as he is discussing certain processes, he says it can be done like this, but it can also be done like that. And he takes it to a higher and more comprehensive level and says, in the integral yoga, this is how we would take it up and not that way. And then, even portions where he says certain things are possible, but that will be kept for a later discussion when we come to the yoga of self perfection, and so on. So, in the larger perspective, all of these chapters, which although seemingly describing those three systems, are in fact used by Sri Aurobindo and developed as means for entering into the larger movement of the yoga of self perfection. So, in this is a chapter in the yoga of integral knowledge, is a chapter titled The Release from Subjection to the Body, chapter 7. And in my volume, the page numbers are page 331 and 333, from which I will read. In the page 331 of this chapter, he discusses how, as the mind takes up the working of the life force and the body consciousness, it can actually change their habits and free them from those habits. And you will see the great similarity with the passage which we have been studying so far in the chapter on the perfection of the body. But there will be a difference, and the difference is, in the chapter in the Synthesis of Yoga, Release from Subjection to the Body, the whole focus is for the mental consciousness to liberate from the physical, and from the status of liberation, assist the body consciousness itself to get free of its limitations. It does not deal directly with the transformation of physical consciousness. That distinction we will come back to after we read this. So he says, describing how the mental will can change the physical consciousness. But if it is not one of the fundamental habits of nature has established for the relation of the mind, life and body, and if the old sanction is not renewed by the mind or the habit willingly indulged, then eventually the change will come. That is when the mind persists on imposing a will. Even the habit of hunger and thirst can be minimized, inhibited, put away. The habit of disease can be similarly minimized. It's a very interesting formulation. The habit of disease can be similarly minimized and gradually eliminated. And in the meantime, the power of the mind to set right the disorders of the body, whether by conscious manipulation of vital force or by simple mental fiat, will immensely increase. Just one moment. I think you're looking for the passage still? What's your page number? 346. 346 for those who are looking for this. In my page, it is 331. So here is already there's a whole lot of knowledge that's being revealed. First of all, hunger and thirst he classifies as habits of the body. They are not compulsions. And if you look at it from a purely practical, evolutionary perspective, they were the necessary mechanism by which the physical body could impose its need on the life energy or the mind, which otherwise would ignore the body or just trample over its needs, ignoring them completely. So hunger and thirst are the means by which the body reminds us that, oh, you have to take care of this machinery in which you live. Yes?
This is eating is many times emotional issues, and then it's habits of fighting.
Yes, yes. In fact, very often there is a clear mixture of the physical, vital, and mental, because the three are kind of bound into each other, so that any one of them can replicate the symptoms of the other. So, the state of mind could provoke a condition of hunger or thirst, or the state of emotional imbalance could similarly provoke hunger and thirst. But actually, they are interfering with the natural rhythms of the body. And it's part of the initial purification in the practice of the integral yoga that we separate out all these parts so that they begin to function freely in their natural rhythm by their normal principle, and then we liberate their limitations part by part. But as a first step, at least separating them, already it's a relief for the body not to be any more dominated by the emotions or the mental will. So the habit of hunger and thirst can be minimized. So as a first step, that compulsion is minimized and then gradually eliminated. Now, if you have managed to minimize already and you're moving towards elimination, imagine the responsibility that comes on you as a conscious being inhabiting the body to look at the body and make sure that you feed and give it the water as needed, because now you have asked it to not compel you by habit. Then you have that greater responsibility, and obviously you can't live in the mind alone. You must be fully aware of the physical consciousness and its requirements as you go along. But it's a responsibility. Yes, yes. You see, there are methods, techniques of pranayam, breathing exercises, or even certain leaves that one can take, which simply suppress or kill the hunger and thirst instincts. This is not the same thing which he is describing here. These are methods by which you have modified those rhythms of the body in such a way that they don't work anymore. But you have not mentalized or liberated the physical consciousness and brought it into a domain of freedom. You have just changed one process, replaced it by another process. Will it not? In systems which don't aim at the physical transformation, such methods would be useful. Combination of pranayam and eating of certain specific leaves can free you from the need for food and water. The result is you can, of course, remain in meditation for long hours without disturbance of the body consciousness. It allows you to go very deep without intrusions of the body and all that. So these are methods used by ascetics. But if you aim to transform the physical consciousness, then suppression of these instincts is not going to help. And you would rather transform and liberate the instinct and replace them by a higher awareness in the body. So, first minimization, and then, so hunger and thirst can be minimized, inhibited, put away. So, first you have minimized it, and then you are able to just by willing hold it back. Oh, I feel the hunger pangs starting and the food is not ready. How much time will it take? Oh, another hour. Fine. I tell my stomach, I will my stomach, okay, hang on another hour. And then it doesn't bother you. And after an hour, it kicks in. And if you've been busy reading or doing some other work, it kicks in and you look at the watch and exactly an hour has passed. The body has that kind of precision in its working. And then eventually even put away. Now, what it means put away is that you have not killed it, but you have now taught the body to not bother you if you so choose. And if you so choose, you may also pull it back and say, okay, body, now you remind me when it's time. So it's an operation that is available, but it's no more a compulsion, no more a habit. And if you have got it to that point, then you have already a reasonable control on certain functions. And from there, then the next stage of attainment would be habit of disease to be similarly minimized. Now, you may start with simple tendencies, take up things which are not so chronic, and recall the passage we read the time before last, where Mother speaks of the body's memory. And so, working on the physical consciousness, you can actually withhold the tendencies as they begin to form, minimize the intensity of the thing if it still happens, and gradually eliminate. That process may take longer depending on the type of disturbance, disharmony. And in the meantime, parallelly, you're working on something else. In the meantime, the power of mind to set right the disorders of the body, that grows immensely. So the mental will applying itself on the physical consciousness and putting a will to reshape a disorder, disharmony. And how does it do that? Whether by conscious manipulation of vital forces or by simple mental fiat, that power will immensely increase. So here he is giving you two methods. How does the mind work on the body? One by manipulation of vital force, the other by simple mental fiat. Now you will see this is actually summarizing things we discussed in detail earlier. The action of the mental consciousness taking up the life force and then from life force modifying the physical rhythms is the easiest. There are times though when either this is mastered and you do not need to enter into it consciously, just willing it does it, or on the other extreme, you do not have access to the life force. And all you can do is put a strong mental will. And then that works at a subliminal level or a semi-conscious or subconscious level to work on the life force which works on the body and so on. So often methods used for this type of access involve strong visualizations. So a person will be asked to visualize whatever cut or damage in the body part, visualize it healing, filled with light and healing rapidly, getting well. Or some other, you have had a surgery in some portion and you visualize a white light and invoke the healing, the idea of healing, rapid growth, harmony. In all these, it is directly mental will imposing itself, not having any direct access to the life energy. It is by such mental images that you are trying to push. But the result is that eventually those imagings form an imprint in the mental body, and because it is connected with the life and the subtle physical and gross physical, eventually it seeps down in this way. The easiest method for this kind of access is to create a mental formation by mental will, by mental visualization or sensation, whatever form it takes. You create a strong formation and then you can let it go, and the formation continues and seeps into these lower levels. That's a good start. But it is a much greater degree of mastery when from mental awareness you can develop awareness of the life energy. From there you can develop awareness of subtle physical and then even awareness of the gross physical. And so will, even without entering into specific layers, just will in one single movement. And you're aware of those layers perhaps. Or you enter consciously into specific layers if you feel where it is that there is the disharmony and then deal with it there. But he is covering all of these possibilities in summary. Then he says, by a similar process, the habit by which the bodily nature associates certain forms and degrees of activity with strain, fatigue, incapacity can be rectified. This is another very interesting statement. This is a habit by which bodily nature associates certain forms and degrees of activity with strain, fatigue, and incapacity. For example, when I have to work very hard and sweep the floor of my house or run a certain distance, I know that I get tired every time I reach this distance. or whenever I have done my exercise for so many minutes. And you will see, if you're used to exercising, walking, running, whatever form it takes, there is a regular passage or a regular time, you will notice at an exact fixed time or exact fixed distance, the tiredness kicks in. And what he's saying is, it is a similar habit by which bodily nature associates certain forms and degrees of activity with strain. So when I have gone to this degree, now the habit kicks in by association. I'm supposed to get tired. Oh, I didn't get tired today? There it is. The tiredness has come. And I'm satisfied. Yes, things are as they should be. So it's a degree or certain forms. Whenever I do a lot of lifting, whenever I do a lot of bending, or whenever I climb steps, my knees give trouble, my back gives trouble, my neck gives, whatever it is, the association. It's a habitual association. But this layer of habit goes down very deep down into the subtle physical and gross physical. And that's why he puts this last. Even after disease and disorders of the body. Here is something which is so deeply rooted in the gross physical, in the very substance of the body's working, that it seems almost as if that's how the body is. Do you really believe that the body is capable of doing the mile in a minute? Come on, it's impossible. The biology is not capable of that, as they used to say. Or even 100 years ago, scientists had proved with their mathematics and biological studies that if a man runs faster than a horse, his body will fall apart. Because the horse has so much more stronger muscles and so on and so on. The body cannot do it. And they said so, they believed it. That was a scientific proof by whatever measurements. But when actually a person manages to run beyond faster than a horse, he doesn't fall apart. Because he has brought his body to that point of conviction of its own capacity. So there's a whole habit which is rooted down there on that level. And he says, by a similar process of this change, the habit by which bodily nature associates certain forms and degrees of activities with strain, fatigue, and incapacity can be rectified. This habit can be rectified. And instead, a new habit can be brought up, or rather, liberating from habit, a new freedom can be brought up. What is that? He says, and the power, freedom, swiftness, effectiveness of the work, whether physical or mental, which can be done with this bodily instrument, marvelously increased, doubled, tripled, decupled. So not only physical strain, there is also association of the body with mental strain. When I read so much time or so many pages, I get drowsy or I get tired, or if I think too long, then my mind gets woozy or my body gets unsettled in some way or other.
But opposite, opposite. For example, I give you example when I read like divine,
Yes.
especially like divine, suddenly incredible energy.
Right.
Like burning, I want to do, blah, blah, blah. That is,
Yes, that is what he is describing here. So you can bring in instead this power, freedom, swiftness, effectiveness of the work. And the best way is, of course, not just with mental will, but mind opening to something higher, to the intuitive and beyond. And in this case, when you are reading the Life Divine, your mind is opening to that higher state of consciousness, which then flows, not only filling the mind, but the life energies and the physical, and everything is lifted up. Yes, yes.
but it's difficult to
Yes.
canalize.
Right.
I take my cycle and I come back. That is incredible.
Yes. So we have to build the capacity of holding. But this is often common when we have spent time and worked on bridging these levels of consciousness. And then when the mind turns to the higher, or when the higher descent takes place, it flows through all these layers. Otherwise, It is received by one part, often just in the mind or the emotional part, and the other parts reflect it and they don't receive as much. But if they have been similarly made somewhat conscious and harmonized with these higher parts, then it can stream through down all the way, even in the physical tissue. You have to work on it. There are individuals, and we will perhaps discuss this in the next page when we come to that. There are individuals in whom there is as if a native degree of awakening in the physical consciousness. Part of the heredity or work done by the parents, which is as if transmitted into the children, or very rarely, the psychic being, having worked on the physical consciousness earlier, brings that sensitivity and infuses it in the physical substance in this body. In either case, what one sees, we see sometimes these young children or sometimes even older people, where the mind has not opened to the spiritual, and yet in the physical consciousness there is a clarity of a light, a receptivity. If only they opened consciously, so much could be done on the physical level. But they have not done it. But when they do, then we find this very rapid opening all the way down to the physical. But that's an advantage they have because of various other things. The point being, in general, everybody needs to work at it at some point to create that connection and then deepen and widen and free up all these layers down to the most physical. Then what streams through goes all the way down, and even the physical consciousness can directly receive and participate in that higher light and spiritual force. In such a case, even the tissue feels a glow and can actually changes its character, can become as if soft and baby-like during the time when that afflatus fills the body. And of course, if it is lost, then you can feel the same tissue now feels so different and so much duller and so on.
But maybe
Yes.
you have experience that the body change every 7 years.
Yes. Right. That's the potential. You see, if the body is reshaping and recasting itself every 7 years, then in principle you should be able to change everything in the physical body within a span of 7 years. And Sri Aurobindo speaks of this. He says when he put a strong mental will on reshaping his bone structure of the waist, and the bone structure actually became slimmer and shaped itself, he said it took about 5 to 6 years of the sustained mental will. But because it's the bone which is the dullest, hardest, most inconscient part of the physical, it takes that much longer. But still it is within your 7-year cycle of the body's self-renewal. So in principle, if you put a similar will on any chronic illness, and that will was able to touch and restrain the manifestation of that illness for 7 years, then the new rhythm is now set and you will not have the manifestation of that illness anymore. And in principle, any illness can be so changed. Yes. Yes, yes. 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 And Sri Aurobindo refers to this in relation to what is that illness? In one of his letters, somebody is asking about the when the nerves go into spasms. What is it called? Fits, what they call? Epileptic fits, yeah. In relation to epilepsy, he says if the symptoms can be withheld for 7 years, strictly, even if once it happens, then you have to start counting from there again. But for 7 years consistently, if you can withhold the symptoms, the body can be free of it. So this is where we see potentially we can overcome anything by this kind of a sustained mental will. But what he's saying here is something even greater. The habit of fatigue, habit of strain, habit of incapacity, even incapacity is a habit, he says. It's an association. Maybe the association is deep rooted and goes back even into the heredity of the species, but still it's a habit, he says. All that can be rectified because it's not the truth of the body, it's not the right relation of the body. And instead, the power, freedom, swiftness, effectiveness of the work can be marvelously increased, doubled, tripled, decupled, increased 10 times. And this is the kind of thing which Sri Aurobindo himself has physically realized and mastered in the physical consciousness. And he is writing this having had that mastery already. When he wrote this would be well after 1916. He had already got it, and we can see in his personal diary notes in the record of yoga how he has become free of all these limitations. You will recall perhaps passages where he is discussing utthapana, levity, the lifting even of a part of the body without feeling strain at all for hours together. And even the arm could be kept up 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, no fatigue at all. And it can just continue to do the work as if nothing has happened. And I've shared here certain signs in mother's own physical body which were described to us by people who were present at the playground. And this particularly description came from the head of the engineering section, Vishwanath Da. He told us this. I've heard it personally from him. He said he would marvel because he would be there recording mother's lectures, and he would marvel at how from the point she sat on her chair, there would be this series of activities going on, sometimes 3 or 4 hours continuously, during which she was required to be seated and people meeting her one after another. At no point did he ever see her body expressing any kind of strain, distress of any kind. And after 4 hours of being seated, when she would look around, oh, everyone's finished, and pop, she got up. No lifting, no strain, no tiredness, no muscle to be stretched. Just sitting like that, and pop, she would get up as if it's the freshest thing that she could do. And she gets up and walks straight out. And he was sharing this, and he said it was such a surprising thing to see. And consider that at that time her biological age was approaching 80. And she was playing tennis. And she stopped playing tennis because she didn't have time. Otherwise, she would have liked to continue. And at 80, she was defeating people who were half and one-third her age. So the body's capacity, body as an instrument itself, can be pushed to this double, triple, decupled. Potentially, he says, no limit. But he has described this process of how the will can take up and reshape these things. And the next para starts by saying, this side of the method belongs properly to the yoga of self-perfection. But it is as well to speak briefly of these things here, both because we thereby lay a basis for what we shall have to say of self-perfection, which is a part of the integral yoga, and because we have to correct the false notions popularized by materialistic science. These are false notions which this materialistic science has made popular because it has proved it, you see. Sri Aurobindo's, yes, the doctors. They have proved it. They have proved that, if you expose yourself to germs, you will get sick and so on. If you expose yourself to cold, then you will catch a cold and so on. He's very careful. Sri Aurobindo's writing, mother's speech is so precise. He says, popularized by materialistic science, and science with a capital S. Suggesting, just by using that word, suggesting that there is a science which is more complete, more comprehensive, not materialistic, bound in that narrow band, but which sees the totality of mind, life, and matter as a continuity of space and looks beyond to the still higher gradations, integrates their interrelations, and it's still a science. In fact, it is the science, and it is the science of the future. It's the science towards which we have to move, but it's also the science that he is revealing here. When Sri Aurobindo describes all these things, it is a scientific exploration of how the body's limits, matter's limits, can be transcended by application of life force and mind and so on. And it's a science. So we have to get free from this false notion popularized by materialistic science. According to this science, the normal mental and physical states and the relations between mind and body actually established by our past evolution are the right, natural, and healthy condition. And anything other, anything opposite to them is either morbid and wrong or a hallucination, self deception, and insanity. Very conveniently, it just takes status quo and says this is law, and anything else is unstable or hallucination. So if we find, for example, a yogi in a state of spiritual afflatus or rapture, he says, I can't help it, but my body feels so light. Ah, that's your imagination. But in fact, he experiences the lightness. Not only experiences it, he can express that lightness and freedom. And occasionally, even that lightness goes to such a degree, he feels his body lifting up, and people outside can objectively see, oh, he is floating up. Now, he doesn't intend to float, it's just the state of change of relationship between physical consciousness and earth consciousness or the higher mental or spiritual consciousness. There's a change in their relationships, that's all. No big deal. Some did it consciously, some it happened spontaneously. But science will say, oh, that's abnormal. Sri Aurobindo says, no, it's not. What is it then? Needless to say, this conservative principle is entirely ignored by science itself when it so diligently and successfully improves on the normal operations of physical nature for the greater mastery of nature by man. Now, we don't say that it is natural for all things in nature to be exactly as they are. We take them and improve upon them. We create plastics, for example. We extract metals and we create machines like the mobile phone which do things which nature didn't do on her own. And we are improving nature and extending our mastery of nature. So if we can do that with matter outside our body, why can't we do that with our body and its consciousness and its relationship with our own mind and so on? We become the lab in which the transmutation of substance takes place. So he says, suffice it to say here, once for all, that a change of mental and physical state and of relations between mind and body, which increases the purity and freedom of the being, brings a clear joy and peace, and multiplies the power of the mind over itself and over the physical functions, brings about, in a word, man's greater mastery of his own nature, is obviously not morbid and cannot be considered a hallucination or self-deception, since its effects are patent and positive. In fact, it is simply a willed advance of nature in her evolution of the individual, an evolution which she will carry out in any case, but in which she chooses to utilize the human will as her chief agent, because her essential aim is to lead the Purusha to conscious mastery over herself. There's a lot that's said here, but quickly we touch upon the key points. That anyway, nature would have continued this evolutionary process of increasing and liberating, purifying and freeing up the body's and mind's capacities and their right relation. But here, all we have done is we have applied a willed advance of nature in her evolution of the individual. But this is possible because she allows it also. In fact, she wants it. She uses the human will as her chief agent. Why do we suddenly feel the need to overcome our limitation? Because she chose to will in us the need to overcome our limitation. So suddenly in humanity, where everybody was stagnant and locked in their safe grooves of regular life, suddenly there is this restlessness and awakening. First, a few individuals burst out and say, "This is not good, we are not satisfied, we need to do more, we need to improve quality of life, we need to learn more, we need to change, we need to develop our capacity." And the rest says, "What is this? You are destabilizing society. You are doing something which is irrational and which is dangerous." But as nature pushes in the whole collective consciousness, this thing wakes up. And then everyone says, "Oh, but that's the normal thing to do, to be dissatisfied and to want to improve and change ourselves. Oh, those people, they were asleep. Those were the dark ages. We are now in the light." And then eventually, as the things begin to change, then we say, "Oh, it's normal for the body is so plastic, it can do anything. Why do you say that it is rigid and it has limitations?" Oh, they used to say then, "Oh, they were at that time, they didn't know the real thing. Now we know the real science and we've just discovered the new technology," and so on. So the whole thing just changes. But the state of mind, values, and aspirations is shifting because nature has willed it. And she is shifting it in us, using human will as her chief agent. And then he puts it in terms of the larger context of evolution. What is her essential aim in man? To lead the Purusha to conscious mastery over herself. Not just over himself, the self aware human consciousness liberating himself in his self awareness, but from his self awareness, mastering all of nature and knowing and expressing nature as his conscious power. In other terms, in Savitri, I unfortunately don't know the lines by heart. Sri Aurobindo describes how nature brings up this little child God who has forgotten his own divinity, and nature nurtures him, nourishes him until she can make him grow to recover himself, and then to possess her and master her. And that's the recovery of the divine, knowing nature as his creative power. So you see, in the larger scheme of things, the one divine consciousness, the Supreme Lord, pours himself out as power of creation, which power eventually dividing, losing herself, falling as if from her divine status, falls into rhythm of mechanical, habitual, lower nature, and as if loses the connection with the Lord. Now you have this cosmos in its universal functioning, mechanically, rhythmically repeating itself. And the Lord is as if up there, separated. No more she responds to him because she is lost in her unconsciousness. And then he enters, projects himself not as one, but in multiplicity, in so many different souls, infinitely. But he also plunges into that self loss. And then we have the status of the divine spark in self loss and nature in self loss. And out of that condition of total self loss, there is this emergence gradually. First, nature in her mechanical movement gradually awakens, we call it evolution. But then she pushes, or behind her, the secret will of the divine pushes to bring out these individuals, awaken the individuality. And as she wakes him up, he turns upon her and begins to seize her and wake her up, and so on. There's a kind of a mutual support until eventually he is liberated, and then he turns upon her and liberates her. And then there is the play of the divine individual and the divine nature within the domain of multiplicity. And then the full dance is revealed, and you have the image very profound, of Sri Krishna dancing with the gopis, the human souls, and the divine revealed. But that dance is an eternal dance, and that's the Leela, the play of the divine in manifestation of multiplicity. So, this is the larger aim towards which everything is moving. We are somewhere in the in between stage where we have come into awareness, but still mental awareness, not divine awareness. We don't yet know who we truly are, but we know that we have to master ourselves and master nature. So it's an in between status, and she is pushing us to lead the Purusha to conscious mastery over herself. So this is the passage from page 331. And you can see how it complements what we have and anticipates what we are now reading. A further passage, skipping a page, and we come to skipping now maybe 2 paragraphs, the 3rd paragraph after this. What's your page number?
348. While dealing with the problem.
Yes.
348.
348 in the other volume, 333 in my volume. And this comes to the question of which was raised last time about the life force. He says, while dealing thus with the body, we have necessarily to deal also with the prana, or life energy. For practical purposes, we have to make a distinction between the life energy as it acts in the body, the physical prana, and the life energy as it acts in support of the mental activities, the psychical prana. For we lead always a double life, mental and physical. And the same life energy acts differently and assumes a different aspect according as it lends itself to one or the other. Psychical, that is to do with the psyche, the inner mental consciousness, but life force dynamizing mind. So what we have now is a sandwich. There is the body of mental life, there is the body of physical life, and in between is the juice, the prana, without which the bread is quite dry and it cannot act on its own. So it's the juice in between which dynamizes both. In one case, the prana turns down into the physical consciousness and identifies with the physical substance, and in the other case, the prana turns up and pushes up the mind, identifying with mind, or pulls down mind depending on how it functions. But it's the same life force taking up 2 different substances and dynamizing both. And because it is taking up these 2 different domains, it feels as if in our subjective experience, I have a mental life and mental identity, I have a physical life and physical identity, but we don't have directly the experience of I have a vital existence. That is not so clear because the life force is identified with these 2 separately. But that also can be had as an experience, though it's a more refined experience. In this case, because it is the same prana ultimately in both substances, the prana also acts as the glue sticking together the mind and the physical. And the result is that what the body undergoes is experienced by mind as its identity, and what the mind imagines strongly is experienced by the body as its compulsion. And if this life energy in between is not bridging the 2, we could not move the body by mental will. And it is through this layer, that the mind imagining strongly produces in the body a certain reaction. So if I, just as an example, it's not a nice example, but it's something which hits home the point. If you imagine your finger being put in a press, somebody squeezing the finger, ouch. Can you feel the finger already itches, pulls back, or gets this strange discomfort? Imagine you're standing next to a car and the car wheel wants to roll over your foot. And if you just imagine it vividly, your foot starts twitching and wanting to pull itself back. Just that idea but visualized provokes a response in the body. Another example which is not directly experienced by us consciously, but which is revealed by research, is the example of people doing exercise in the mind. So this study went like this. They had 3 groups. The first group is a control group which does nothing. They sit for 1 hour doing nothing. The second group is asked to do exercise for 1 hour. The third group is asked to sit on a chair and imagine themselves doing the exercise. So at the end of a month, the first group has had no change because they did nothing. The second group did exercise and put on a certain muscle mass. The third group, which was only imagining doing exercise, had also put on muscle mass, which was up to 1/3 of the group which actually did the physical exercise. Now, what that means is, in practice, 1/3 of whatever you are gaining as a result of your exercise, 1/3 at least could be got purely by mental visualization. Now, in this study, and I tried to read whatever I could of the actual literature, in this study, they did not specify to the participants how they should imagine. And I'll share with you a secret here. You can imagine in 2 ways. You can imagine yourself as a third person observing you doing the exercise. If I just say, imagine yourself doing the exercise, very often people picture themselves in the exercise space doing things and they are out. They are not identified with the experience itself. This is one kind of imagination. There's another type, which is the one which gets you the real result. You imagine yourself identified with the person doing the exercise. Not as third person objective observer, but identified with the experience. And then you will see the difference. You will actually gain not 1/3 but much more of the same result of muscle mass. So what this feels like is you are yourself standing there, you are yourself lifting the weight, bending down, or whatever it is you're doing. And you feel it in yourself as you're doing it. Now, the first reaction will be the body will start twitching as if it's doing the exercise. Your hands will tend to want to move, and you must consciously relax to prevent it from moving. But after some time, once you get the hang of it, you'll find without doing too much in terms of actual physical movement, you will end up with that same result. You will feel the difference in a week, but you have to do it as you would do a physical exercise. The practical difficulty for most people is that you can't hold attention long enough. To do it with the body, it's easier because the body is doing it and the mind's attention is on the body experience. But to do it in this way without the physical body, with the mental awareness, you have to hold attention on the mental process as an internal subjective process. And most people are not trained to hold internal attention. But if you can do it what, 10, 15 minutes a day? Consciously, as if you were doing the physical exercise, you will end up with results within a week. You will notice the difference, and they'll be equivalent. Yes.
At this point, it's not easier to, how to say, imagine the life force in life,
Yes.
and just this thinking that flows in the body. Besides
You could visualize, imagine life force flowing and filling the body, but it won't have the specific result that exercise would do. Now, it'll give you this freshness and burst of energy, but it may not shape the body's capacity and its form, which you would get through exercise. You can even, and I'm going to, this is within the domain of our experience as we are, you can even practice a musical instrument in this way, not visualizing you in the third person, but experiencing in the first person, but in mind. The movement of your fingers. Close your eyes, relax your hand, put them down, and then play with your mind's hands, so to say. And practice with your mind's hands. And they have far greater flexibility than the physical. And there you master it. And then you do it with eyes open, closed, doesn't matter. And then you bring your physical hands in and do it. You'll find the hands have got the habit already. Because actually the mental body and the physical body are superimposed. And you're training both when you're training one or other. And the result is there. So this is a method which once you get the hang of, So many of the things which we have been studying of the mind entering the life force, entering subtle physical, entering the physical, and changing from within, all those things become obvious and simple. So we just continue with the text. So life force here is the glue, bridging these two, because it's the same energy which is dynamizing the two different layers. This is the double life. The same life energy acts differently and assumes a different aspect according as it lends itself to one or the other, mental and physical. In the body, it produces those reactions of hunger, thirst, fatigue, health, disease, physical vigor, etc. You see, it links with the earlier discussion, which are the vital experiences of the physical frame. Interesting distinction. These are vital experiences of the physical frame. For the gross body of man is not like the stone or the earth. It is a combination of two sheaths, the vital and the food sheath. Food in quote marks, that is annam. That's the term used in Sanskrit to describe matter. It's called annam because the nature of the material substance, unlike other gradations of substance in the cosmos, the nature of material substance is that it is eating even as it is eaten. Everything is in a process of constant absorption of substance from outside and losing itself into forms of other substance. So it is the food sheath and the vital. And its life is a constant interaction of these two. That's the difference between our biology and the dead matter or stone. This is living matter because life force has fused itself into the substance and is working parallelly, simultaneously with that gross matter. So that's why he calls it vital experiences of the physical frame. Still, the life energy and the physical frame are two different things. And in the withdrawal of the mind from the absorbing sense of the body, we become increasingly sensible of the prana and its action in the corporeal instrument and can observe and more control its operations. So when the mind is completely bound, stuck in the sandwich, we can't distinguish these three layers. But when the mind separates and observes as a separate self-awareness, then we begin to distinguish these different layers of working. Practically, in drawing back from the body, we draw back from the physical life energy also. And even while we distinguish the two and feel the latter nearer to us than the mere physical instrument, the entire conquest of the body comes in fact by the conquest of the physical life energy. Now he is not saying that only physical life energy. Remember, this is a kind of a summary in anticipation of the later discussion. So to gain the body conquest of the body consciousness, you must conquer physical life energy. This is the key. Once you have that, then all the rest is achieved. So the entire conquest of the body comes, in fact, by the conquest of the physical life energy. If you can master life energy in the body, then you can master the body. But you still have to do further work. And the subtle physical and the gross physical are not mentioned here in distinction because here the focus is not transformation of the physical. The focus here is liberation of the mental consciousness in order to turn around and master the physical. That's all. But subsequently, when the mental consciousness and the higher must take up the physical, not just in mastery but in transformation, then the distinctive layers even in the physical become important. And the subtle physical and the gross physical are therefore separately mentioned in the passage we are reading here in the perfection of the body. So he mentions also other things, how we lose the fear of death and things like that when this kind of separation is achieved, but that we will leave. For those of you who are interested in this particular description of how the mind can free itself in order to master, this chapter and the next are extremely useful. I would even say you can start reading from the chapter titled Concentration onwards, because that's where the power of mind in concentration is brought upon changing and liberating. Otherwise, just this release from subjection of the body, and the next chapter is release from the heart and the mind. So, a similar process will allow a separation from the life energy, which he then elaborates in the next chapter. And then, separately, even the mental Purusha stands back from the mind's processes and thoughts. And that completes the release to station ourselves in the mental witness. The chapter after that is release from the ego, which is the next great step. Yes. We'll pause. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. If one cannot emphasize enough the importance of the mental will in this whole process. When you're recovering from an illness, if your mental will is disheartened by negative doctor, well, you've had it. Because the whole support which the body had to pull it up by the mind, that is lost. And it goes even quite deep, suggesting on a subliminal level and compromising on that level. So there's an interesting study which was done for this. When they were doing certain types of surgery, the doctors were told to make comments while the patient was under anesthesia. And the comments were deliberately requested, which were opposite of what they actually believed. So when they saw a patient where they thought the recovery would be fast, they made a comment like, oh, this patient will take a long time to recover, there'll be lots of complications. And when it was the reverse, when they thought the patient would have problems, they were asked to say, oh, he will recover quickly, there'll be no problem. And in fact, what was found is, subsequently the recovery matched the statements that they made while the patient was under anesthesia. Now, what that brings a completely different dimension in medicine, which unfortunately is still not formally tapped, because doctors are afraid of saying that the power of mind is greater than on the body. But what it means is they should not be making casual comments. In fact, if you ever visit a operation theater, you will find the doctors gossiping, chatting about all kinds of crazy things which have nothing to do with the patient, the state of consciousness in which they function, crude jokes that they make about the patient and about other things, ongoing news. All of these things are the kind of vibes which seep in, and because you are at that point under anesthesia, it's like a post-hypnotic suggestion, which changes everything.
There are two types of anesthesia, local and full.
These were general anesthesia. So the person was not conscious, the person was effectively asleep.
To what extent the will
Yes, so I'm saying the same principle now extends in the conscious will. If this is the action you can see at the subliminal level, at a conscious level you have the same issues. And if you believe that you will take longer, that the illness will last longer, there will be complications, well, it will happen. The belief, of course, being deep-rooted. But on the other hand, if you know, and let's use the word instead of belief, the faith, the conviction in the body, in the life energy is innate in the mind, not imposed as a construction. If you have that conviction that you will recover rapidly and things will be clear, you will get that result. And so the state of consciousness of the patient and the mental will and its conviction are extremely important. And here we touch another angle which was mentioned in our discussion the time before last, where I said you can actually project an imprint of a formation into another. So if the patient is not sure, if his will is flagging, then someone else nearby can bring in that conviction into the patient. And often it is done with a punch of life force. A good doctor, one who has lots of cures, is one who brings this positive vitality to his patients. And a doctor who is bad, who has lots of failures, is one who brings in the doubt and negative suggestions to his patients.
there's also is the degree of obstinacy and going up. If a child is obstinate enough not to believe everything
then this kind
Yes.
of will takes
Yes.
takes
That's why ultimately a lot depends on the imprint of the temperament and character and the extent to which a person has been taught to refer to his deeper knowing and so on. And instinctively, and this is the case with a lot of us here, instinctively in our childhood we would have rebelled against certain ideas imposed on us. And I'll ask, why and from where did that instinct come? And it came from the psychic being within, which brought certain tendencies from earlier lives where it has worked in these kinds of efforts. And it brings that in, and the surface nature is not conscious of it, but it is able to put a certain imprint on the surface nature. When something comes which is contrary, you just feel you refuse, you push against that, you don't know why. And maybe those adults say, oh, you're obstinate, oh, you're foolish, oh, you are. But somewhere inside you, there's this lock as if you refuse to accept certain things and resist. And later, when your mind has developed and you look back and you have read these things and you say, oh, wow, that's what it was. And you're grateful for that obstinacy. Yeah. But imagine what a needless struggle if only we could have made that transition more consciously. And as children carried forward the conscious memory of what it is that we are clinging to. If the psychic being has sufficiently matured that it can take forward this result of this life into the next, what a great gift, and how much we will save ourselves trouble. And if we have, in addition, an environment which is conducive, where the parents are conscious and can actually recognize that in the child and even state it to the child, that would be such a great gift. And it is this kind of an environment of conscious beings which can receive conscious souls and assist to make a conscious transition that Mother was indirectly trying to create in the community that she allowed to grow around the ashram and then later in Auroville. In many ways, it was a compromise, as if for the concentrated sadhana of the ashram that was going on, when she allowed the refugees and their children and families to form. But it is this opportunity that she saw and which she tried to inculcate in the collective consciousness and in a new society that she was trying to form. And in the long run, the benefit of having created that outweighed the benefit of a small humanity reaching a higher state and creating a bridge and then struggling to spread that into a larger collectivity. It was a kind of it's something difficult to describe, but if you look at it, you can see why she chose this over the other option. In a certain way, we have lost something of that concentrated space of sadhana. It's got diluted immensely, and today we struggle with the dilution. But on the other hand, something else which was created allowed the persistence of these values for a longer term and a transmission of these. I'm using the word values because we are not yet transmitting an experience, but at least the transmission of the values and ideals on a broader level in the collective life that was allowed. And of course, a similar framework has been now widened to the scope of a township in Auroville, a conscious township. But it still demands so much more from us that we can hold those values as a collectivity. At the moment, we are still many small subgroups which hold those values. We have not yet taken it to the level of the entirety of the collectivity, but that will happen gradually. So, all of these show the importance of the conscious participation of mind in the body's habits. And we have seen the layers of habits at the level of illness, at the level of functions which are at a level of deeper habits, and then even at the level of fatigue and incapacities. All these are habit and nothing else, to be transformed. So even within, we come back to our text now from the supramental manifestation, perfection of the body. Even within the limits of its present evolution, it is difficult to measure the degree to which the mind is able to extend its control or its use of the body's powers and capacities, even in the present evolution, with no spirituality. And when the mind rises to higher powers still and pushes back its human boundaries, it becomes impossible to fix any limits. He says, and I go back to an earlier part of the text, when this life force, subtle physical and gross physical, are made more and more conscious in their automatism, these energies and their action become more conscious and more aware of itself and more perfect. Actually, the life force acquires a quality of self-awareness in the way mind has awareness. The subtle physical acquires quality of self-awareness. Gross physical acquires quality of self-awareness in its own state. All of that begins to happen. And if there is this higher infusion of consciousness, higher powers, it becomes impossible to fix any limits. Now, what that means, take it very literally. What that means is there is no limit to the body consciousness. There's no limit to the extent to which the body's capacities can be liberated and the body's functions transformed. No limits. Even in certain realizations, an intervention by the will in the automatic working of the bodily organs seem to become possible. What that would mean practically is this. Oh, my kidneys are functioning in a particular way, and just as I can close my fist and open my hands, I can pull back my kidneys working or redirect them in any particular way I want. Why kidneys? Heart, lungs, stomach, intestinal workings, and what are those special glands which control the blood sugar and the release of fatty acids, and the glands which control the release of hormones and so on. And all of that can be literally controlled as you would control your fingers. You could pull back, increase, release, modify, change relationships. What are chronic illnesses after all? If you just take something like diabetes, what is it after all? It's a disharmony between two or three functions in the body. One thing not matching the requirement of another. It's not an incapacity inherent, it's just a disharmony in the relationship of working. And if you're conscious of those parts, you can just will them as you train your fingers to work in harmony when you play an instrument. You will them back into right harmony, and that's it, the illness is gone. Once the body is sufficiently conscious, literally you can reshape all these functionings at will. In between, in the transition to that degree of mastery, one would gradually be setting through struggle, through persistent will and awareness developing, seeping in, entering layer by layer and changing from within. We would be reshaping certain workings bit by bit until eventually we would increase the full scope of the body's working. Even, as Sri Aurobindo observes, reshaping the bone structure. And of course, that's the harder part because bone is inconscient. But shaping the tissue, fat, muscle, nerves, all of these are possible. There is actually an experience one has when at a certain point, because of a persistent, let's say, descent of a higher consciousness in the physical or a sustained psychicization of the physical, you can feel as if the nerves have become more conscious, more sensitive, and actually grow in numbers within the body. Grow in numbers, in fine detail. You see, on a biological level, the number of nerve endings varies according to heredity and other things, training. A lot of it forms in the first 3 years of the bodily life. Some of it continues even after till the age of 20. But if that's the capacity for the nerves to grow and extend themselves, then why not with a spiritual intervention in such a way for them to grow even more? just as an example, purely by the habit of nature, in the female of the species, there are more nerve endings per square centimeter of skin than in the male of the species. What that means practically is if you touch the skin, the female of the species experiences far greater richness and detail of sensation than the male of the species. Why is that? Well, biological habit. It's the same with sight. The actual distinctions of fine variation of color is greater in the female of the species than in the male of the species. Why? Habit of nature, nothing else. But if you train, you can actually develop in both the same degree of refinement of detail of colors. And especially farmers who have to deal with recognizing the health of their crop by fine variations of colors, they end up developing it for no other reason than the practical need. And they even develop specific names for fine distinctions of green. So it is said that a good farmer can distinguish up to 300 shades of green. It's possible. But what about us who have never made that effort? Oh, well, you have 3 or 4 names and that's about it. But the point being, the nerves grow, they continue to grow and they reshape themselves along with the rest of the tissue. And in principle, therefore, a sustained pressure in this way can increase the nerve endings on the skin surface and in the eyes and in the tongue and the taste, and all the senses can be enormously heightened with a biological basis for that heightening by the increase of nerve endings. And imagine how much more rich the experience of life would be. And it's difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced this, either a loss of that richness or an increase of that richness. We are so used to thinking everybody sees and hears and smells and tastes and touches the way we do. It's not true. Everybody has a different degree of experience of richness and detail. As an example, if you take your fingers like this and touch a seed, your brain is as if programmed to think there is only that there are actually 2 seeds here, okay, because of the position of your fingers. But the same thing if you do with a compass, with a divider, 2 tips, at a distance of about a centimeter, place it just lightly on the skin, on the back of the hand. You'll say, I can feel 2 points. Bring them slightly closer than 1 centimeter and place it. You won't feel 2 points, you'll feel 1 point. That's the crudeness, coarseness of the sensitivity of the back of the hand, which is one of the more conscious parts. But the same thing on the tip of the finger, you'll be able to make out distinctions down to 0.5 millimeter perhaps. Imagine if all the surface of your skin had that kind of distinction. Even the wind blowing against your face would be such a rich and complete experience. So all of these things are actually possible and do happen. The whole body can reshape its biological basis for life on all levels, down to the most material senses. And then into that, a different kind of consciousness relating through those senses, experiencing, seeing not only this rich range of colors, but seeing beyond the colors into that inner glow of the subtle physical or the divine presence that infuses itself in the colors. And all these layers of experience simultaneously laid upon each other, simultaneously experiencing, each fully released into its maximum of richness. All that is part of the divine experience of life. And the biological basis also can arise to support it in the most material detail.
Sraddhalu, il y avait one question just before I came by your turn, Ajanta, you said the substance of the body is the same as the substance of the earth.
Of the?
De la terre.
Yes.
Le corps
Yes.
a la même substance que la terre.
Yes, yes.
Alors, can you explain?
No, it's actually a very deep statement. When Mother says that the substance of the body is the same as the substance of the earth, there's actually a very deep truth which he is revealing on many levels. First, on a very practical level, superficial level, this body is made of the food you eat, which was grown out of the earth. So the plant is made of the soil, and that's what makes your tissue. So your tissue is nothing but the soil in which you live, now rearranged to express life. Okay, it's the same substance. At a very superficial level. But a deeper level, the substance of the whole earth, with all its variations of soil and all its variation of substance and all its different elements and in their combinations, is replicated in the human body. And I'll just indicate certain symbols on a more material, superficial level. The body is 3/4 water. The surface of the earth is 3/4 water. Isn't it? Wait. The particular mix of minerals in the seawater is exactly the same in proportion as the mix of minerals in the blood. The saltiness is exactly the same, and all the rest of the minerals. The only difference is we have red blood cells and other complex cellular structures flowing in the blood. Otherwise, mineral-wise, mineral plus water, we are seawater, exactly the same. Okay? Wait, one more. The total quantity of air around the earth, okay? If you compare with the volume of air in the average human lungs and see the proportion, it's exactly the same as the total number of molecules of air within your lungs. Okay? The molecules in your lungs are in number the same as the total number of lungfuls of air in the earth. Interesting, isn't it? If you breathe out one breath, okay, the molecules you have released are just enough that you could have so many lungfuls, and each lungful would have one of those molecules. In other words, each time you breathe in, you're breathing in at least one molecule of the air that Mother breathed out a few decades ago. You can play with that idea. But the point being, you see a certain physical resonance of substance and proportions and numbers of the whole earth with the human body. And you can even say the human body is the whole earth consciousness as a planetary consciousness individualizing itself in a being that lives on earth for the experience of itself through so many individualized forms. And the same thing extends in resonance all the way to the universe. The whole universe and all the material that exists in the entirety of the universe is represented in us and is needed by the body for its survival. And you see strange things. Things which minerals, chemicals, elements which you consider totally unnecessary for life, even poisonous for life, they're all necessary in the body in minute quantities. You remove them and the whole body system falls apart. You have these very fine deficiencies of metals, for example, without which the mental functioning and the vital functioning and things which involve especially the rarefied parts, they don't work. And you have all kinds of mental illnesses. You bring back the balance of that in that minute trace element, they call it, then everything works fine. You have increased that a little more than the trace and the body gets poisoned. And there's some deep truth there, which we will see in the passage we read subsequently. Actually, in our body, everything out there in the universe is represented. And if you again bring it back from this comprehensive picture all the way to a more practical level, for a healthy body, you need to eat everything that's out there. If you leave out something, eventually it leads to an imbalance in the system. And of course, we can limit ourselves to the plant life alone. You don't have to eat animal life, but The full range of plant life and grain is enough to give you the complete nourishment. But if you knock out one or the other, you will find there's an imbalance eventually developing. So, in other words, to put it in a different terminology, you need to eat from the whole universe to be the complete miniature universe that you're supposed to be. The microcosmos has to draw from the totality of the microcosmos, maybe through representations, but still, to be able to be the complete microcosmos. So, this is the deeper truth of that statement. There is a still deeper layer which goes further down when she says this is the same tissue. And it comes to the spiritual truth of it, that it's the earth taking on this form of the human being. And so it is the earth body, earth substance, which is miniaturized in this microcosmos, or even the whole universe miniaturized in the cosmos, as a microcosmos here. The universe is waking up to itself, so to say. God shall grow up while the wise men talk and sleep, but it is on many levels that this can be experienced. On the most material level of the material universe, the evolving human consciousness is God growing up in matter. And that's why we represent the whole of the earth consciousness in its awakening. So it's like this: if you were to wake up, the whole earth body cannot wake up because she needs to provide the base also to hold these individualized forms. So she wakes up in parts of herself, and the parts which have woken up are this living person. So we can see this on many levels, and Mother always speaks on several levels in this way. Okay, so yes, yes, yes. You see, Earth is our mother, our physical mother. And she is a conscious being. And as a mother, you've seen mother carrying a child on her arms, and the child gets angry and starts hitting the mother. And the mother says, okay, okay, okay. Puts up with that kind of thing. And even gives a lot of nourishment and affection and love to this petulant and rebellious child, helping him to wake up. And that's what's happening right now. But there's a point where she may say, okay, enough. Now you learn this lesson. Or even occasionally, a whack, wake up. This is not right. So that sort of thing is also happening through a lot of the imbalances of nature's working, earthquakes, cyclones, and things like that, where she says, okay, enough. And Mother observes that often these things concentrate in areas where there is a resistance to growth of consciousness. And the blows come to shake out, break the status quo, and change things. But she is very careful. She is very, she's a loving mother. So, although she would like to shake herself and change things, she does it gently as much as possible. So that, if earth shakes too much, everything will break apart. And she doesn't want that to happen. She would rather we are cajoled into awakening. A lot depends on our participation eventually. Okay. So an intervention of the will in the automatic working of bodily organs becomes possible. And generally, he says, wherever limitations recede, and in proportion as they recede, the body becomes a more plastic and responsive, and in that measure, a more fit and perfect instrument of the action of the spirit. Now, in this sentence, he is telling us what are the criteria by which the body can be called a more perfect instrument for the action of the spirit. After all, the whole point of the body is for manifestation of the spirit in the material world. Otherwise, spirit could have just come and floated around as spiritual being on the physical earth and enjoyed its spiritual existence on physical earth without ever taking a material body. And it would be fine. We would say we are liberated beings, we are perfected beings. Why get stuck with the physical consciousness? The point is, spirit wanted a physical experience of physical substance and to manifest in matter its freedom and glory. And so it took this up, and in taking this up, it kind of got stuck in it. And now the whole process of shaping the instrument through which it must manifest to raise it all the way to the spirit.
Which we
So,
said in the divine means the nature coming supernatural.
mhm,
Yeah, you
right,
enhance
right,
it
right.
in the spiritual level.
Yes,
Before, not
yes,
after. But to change this
yes.
rule.
So there are in fact planets in the universe where the beings inhabiting are non-material. They are only in the subtle or subtle physical even, but they don't have a material existence. And in a certain sense, that's a still partial manifestation. And the curve of evolution would be when they can take on a gross physical body and then manifest through the physical body their higher potential. Then only we are moving forward in evolution. Otherwise, there's no evolution. They are typal beings. They're stuck in that level of consciousness in which they live. So, what's the measure that this body is a fit and perfect instrument for the action of the spirit? Because that's the only thing which matters. The measure is the body becomes a more plastic and responsive instrument. If the body can respond to the will of spirit, if the body can match its plasticity with the plasticity of spirit, that what spirit chooses to flow in, the body follows perfectly without resistance, then you have the perfect instrument. And if you now look at the whole of evolution, you can actually describe all the gradations of evolution in terms of increase of responsiveness and plasticity to spirit. And layer by layer, you see the whole of evolution unfolding. And in the human, the greatest potential of responsiveness and plasticity exists. So there is the Upanishadic story of how the gods wanted to take birth on earth, and the divine gave them so many forms, and there's a list, first this form, and then that form, and then that form, and it describes the evolution of consciousness through form. And every time the gods said, oh, that's good, but not good enough. And eventually the human form was given, and they said, this is perfect. And so we will enter. And all the gods rush into the human body and take up their respective stations at different locations in the body. It's a very deep symbolic story, but you get a sense of what this means. And how do we become more plastic and responsive? Wherever limitations recede, and in proportion as they recede. So the whole evolution is really the pushing away of limitations, pushing away in conscience and clearing out a space which grows more and more conscious, more and more free of limitation, and therefore more and more responsive and more plastic to respond to spirit. And now we are at this point where spirit can manifest consciously, though within the limitations of our responsiveness. And the physical consciousness, or at least the mind in the body, can invoke spirit and give itself consciously, although bound in its limitations. And you have a meeting point of spirit and matter, with mind as mediator in between. This is the point we are at in evolution, and now the great breakthrough can take place where a conscious infusion of one into the other can take place and speed up rapidly the whole evolutionary process. And so he says, now bringing us to this point, he says, in all effective and expressive activities here in the material world, the cooperation of the two ends of our being is indispensable. The key word is this: to be effective, to express in the material world. You need these two to cooperate. If you didn't want to be effective in the material world, you just exist in the material world, you hold a great knowledge, a great power, a great joy and bliss, but you are ineffective as far as its expression is concerned. You remain in a kind of a protective shell, isolated from the other extreme of life. It doesn't matter. The cooperation of the physical with the spiritual is not necessary. But if you want to be effective, if you want to express the spiritual on earth, then the cooperation of these two ends of our being is indispensable. If you were to express in subtle worlds, again, it wouldn't matter. Matter need not need not have to participate. To express in the material world, you have to have matter's cooperation. So if the body is unable, whether by fatigue or by natural incapacity or any other cause, to second the thought or will, or is in any way irresponsive or insufficiently responsive, to that extent the action fails or falls short or becomes in some degree unsatisfying or incomplete. So there's something trying to express, the body cannot keep up, is fatigued or is blocked or cannot respond sufficiently, it dulls the whole impact of what is expressed. And here comes the key. Even, he says, even when there is an outpouring of poetic inspiration, there has to be something in the physical vibrations of the brain responding to that intuition, otherwise it cannot receive the intuition and manifest. That's the next sentence, but we'll leave that for next time. And here we're going to discover another great revelation, which will have so many implications, that there has to be something in the physical substance which responds to the higher, for it to be able to manifest in the material body or life. And what kind of substance is it which can respond? What is that? How can we increase or develop that? And are there gradations within that? All of that will be part of the discussion which will emerge from this. So we'll pause here and keep it for next time. And just hold this idea that the spirit has to manifest, and for that the body has to offer a responsive and plastic instrumentation. And that's the focus of our effort in relation of mind and body. We can take up any questions briefly. This is such an important passage for our understanding, but also as we dwell upon it, it changes how we look at ourselves, both as a mental being and as a body. And it can reshape completely the relationship we have to the spiritual and to the divine. If we can bring this idea, this awareness of this right relation, and hold that at the back of our mind in the midst of all our activities, almost automatically you will find everything is given a spiritual turn. And everything is made an occasion for developing this possibility of spirit and matter meeting and manifesting. Yeah.
That reminds me what the mother said to Ranade, that the new music is waiting
Yeah.
and it's looking for
Yes.
open instruments, a free instrument for the open choir.
Yes. Yes, there's something else interesting, similar, which takes place in the collective consciousness. And just as an individual will have the responsiveness, a group consciousness also must have that. So when Mother spoke to Narad of bringing down the highest music, high above words and thoughts, and to manifest that. And that's how he developed this Om choir. But what is interesting to see is it's a collective body now, which receives the music and manifests it. And to the extent that the collective consciousness is harmonized, what comes through just pours, and we are as if played by the instrument, by the spirit as an instrument, as a group instrument. And when there is not that receptive state, then you can feel the thing wants to manifest, it's trying to manifest, but it stutters and stumbles in the group instrumentation. I had this experience I'll share. I had attended a few Om choirs earlier and they were beautiful, elevating, etc. But I had a revealing experience more recently. And it was in one of the Om choirs which we had at the end of the Integral Yoga Retreat in South Carolina, the last day. The first day when we started. It was a group of about 60 or 70 people. And there was a click because everybody was fresh, concentrated on the retreat to begin, and it was held. And I had this distinct experience of one power, one light force power, pressing on the whole collective consciousness. And the whole thing like a vessel or a single instrument of so many keys, each individual like a key. And I could experience the movement as if coming in places on groups of individuals, like as if fingers pressing. I have difficult to use words except through analogy, but as if something here, here, and as if playing the group as one instrument. And at points I could experience the thing flowing, and then after the flow, the people would start chanting. And it was even to the extent of experiencing when it touched this group of 4 people, those 4 came out to the same note. And occasionally it would span across individuals and come up in this way. It was amazing as an experience. It didn't happen again in the same way later, but just as a revelation of what it was doing and how the working out was taking place, it was amazing to see what a group consciousness could be as a collective instrument to manifest a higher truth. And in music, of course, one expresses the harmony most obviously. If you are not right, it hits you. In workspace, it's harder. But that's the kind of a divine symphony that can manifest in a collective life, in all the details, rich details of the collective life also.
Your subtle physical is so developed.
Oh, it was just a glimpse. Yeah. Nargis had asked one question she wanted me to share, because Anand Reddy had shared an experience at Srinagar in Kashmir where we had both been, and she wanted me to share something of that. We had a very beautiful trip to the top of the Shankaracharya hill, as it is called, where Sri Aurobindo had a special experience of the vacant infinite, I think that is the term he used. And there was something quite unusual we all felt going to the top, not only in the climb but also on reaching the top. And then in the temple itself, there was a certain power and presence. A huge Shivalinga, this size. And also next to it, a small temple where Adi Shankaracharya is said to have done his meditation for days together. Sri Aurobindo went there to Kashmir along with the Maharaja of Baroda. They were there for several days. And on visiting this place, he had this special experience, as well as other places where he had other experiences. But this was special. And we could feel being there, this something of a touch of that wideness, vastness pressing on us. And that's the kind of experience one can get in some of these special concentrated locations. There is as if a spiritual force and power established. And often in the very ancient times, the higher parts, the more spiritually developed beings would recognize it for what it was, and then create a physical embodiment as a support for it. And that's why they created these temples at the top of these sacred hills. In certain traditions, they didn't create formal temples, as in the Native American, but they recognized this and that power and gave it names. But in India especially, they would often build a temple there to ground that power as if. And the temple always represented that particular attribute or aspect which was manifesting. So in this case, this vacant infinite that Sri Aurobindo had as experience, the temple is of Shiva, and in the form of Shiva Linga, which is the most abstract, essential form of his power, freedom, and wideness. As distinct from, say, Nataraja, where you have a more distinct form and a particular quality of manifestation. Here it is this pure freedom and liberation. And you can feel that power grounded there by the temple. Where the temple has been neglected or even broken by invasions, the power itself does not go away, but its grounding in matter as if weakens. And I'm relating it to the passage we have just read, that there has to be something in the most material part which responds, and if that response is there, then the manifestation can be so much more complete. Otherwise, it's there anyway. The equivalent experience you have when you go to the samadhi at the time when there's a huge rush of tourists, the presence doesn't go away, but it's as if its density recedes and you can't feel it so palpably on a material level. And then after the tourists pass, and then there is as if the return of that dense presence settling once again, and especially late in the evening or early mornings when the density is there so palpable. It's the same presence. The presence is not gone, but its physical vibrations, to use the technical term, its physical vibrations can be diluted or even driven out or return. My teacher, MP Pandit, had written an article where he made some comment, critical comment, of the tendency to want to sweep this floor around the samadhi several times in the day. And he observed in that article that Mother didn't want that space around the samadhi to be disturbed in this way. She wanted the density to settle, and so it's enough to sweep once a day. And subsequently, I think they made a change. I don't know if the change is still there. But one of the old sadhaks, Nagin Doshi, he met me, and he had a certain, there's a lot of correspondence with Sri Aurobindo. He is the one to whom Sri Aurobindo wrote, "You must get rid of this habit of the stomach for indigestion," things like that. He read that article, and then he told me, and Panditji had written there that the physical vibrations recede or they are diluted by this kind of disturbance. He read the article and he told me, how can he write that? The presence doesn't go away. And the next day he told me, I made a mistake. He is described as a physical vibration. Yes, the physical vibration does go away. The presence doesn't go away. So that was his distinction. He was sitting there as one of the watchmen near the samadhi, and he would be always half in meditation. But those distinctions one begins to make. But this grounding in the most material part is extremely valuable. If the spiritual force acquires a density which approximates the gross physical or the subtle physical, it is extremely valuable because it works in the body for the transformation of the body consciousness. And even if you do nothing much, just soaking in that, it works in you and opens in the most material part those layers which resist the full reception of the spiritual force and its embodiment. And to hold that is a very precious gift, and we must make every effort not to dilute that thing.
Sraddhalu, I tell you my inner experience. When I go up to Sri Aurobindo room, when I touch the wood, I have great connection with the wood.
Yes.
It's immediately my body stops.
Yes.
And was a touch.
Yes.
And I stay, I don't go in.
Right.
It's very, I don't,
Yes.
but it's always.
Yeah.
In the floor is different here sometimes.
When we touch, yes, when we touch the things they have touched or which have been blessed and which still hold that power, immediately in that contact we are able to feel, and there's a transmission of that vibration. It's actually a substance. It is a grade of substance which is received. We'll discuss that in great detail next time. But that's the advantage of the touch and the contact. When you touch the samadhi, you can feel that substance slowly seeping into you. And it has its effect physically.
Told about the mountains. In South India, in Palani and Tirupati, actually there used to be a Siddha there, and he installs the statue. Similar tradition.
Yes.
Even Mailam nearby mountain.
He did what to the statue?
Invokes the presence.
Right, yes. So in the tradition, when you have a temple which is established, you are supposed to ask a spiritual being, a self-realized person, to invoke the divine presence into the icon, the idol. Until then, it's just a piece of metal, wood, or stone. It's only when the spiritual power is invoked and is established, then it becomes living. So it is called prana pratishtha, establishing the life in the being. Then it is a living being, and then you treat it as a person, although it can't move. It can't move because there is not something in the matter responding to the mental force of movement. But it holds the power, and it is a person, and it is a conscious person. And sometimes the power can get diluted because people bring in mixed vibrations. So they have generally a renewal every 12 years to purify the presence and revivify it, so to say. But all of these belong to the domain of a more occult reality. But the principle here of matter meeting spirit is what I'm emphasizing in all these. I also had a brief sense of the space of each city, as you know, has its own particular vibration. And one could feel in Srinagar, the capital of Kashmir, one could feel, at least I felt, a sense of a presence of something mystical and spiritual above, but not any more grounded in matter as before. It must have been at one point much more grounded. That is why it is still there. And that's why it used to be called Srinagar. Sri is the name given to the highest aspect of the Divine Mother. So this is the city of the Divine Mother. And that was that was the name given because of the presence that it held. And that's why you find there practically all the spiritual traditions and lineages represented even to this day. Even though subsequently many of the destructive invasions followed and things like that, but still those things are rooted and grounded in various parts, and often in lineages and traditions which are still held in individuals. But one could feel the space was sacred. And of course, physically, it has the sense of a flat space like a valley surrounded by mountains all around. And sometimes even the physical arrangement reflects the spiritual vibration of that space. Mother, you note also, preferred always the land which is the highest, even in the city. If you notice in Pondicherry, the part where the ashram is, the ground slopes down to the sea and then slopes down also to the west towards the canal. It's the highest part in that whole area. And it's not by chance. And similarly, she chose the location of Auroville initially in an area which was near the lake, which was also the highest part of the land in and around Pondicherry, the center of which later she asked someone to buy, and she named it Top Land. And right next to it is also Jipmer. And when she chose Jipmer as the location, she said it's the part which is the highest part of Pondicherry. So the point was she noted all these things, even in the lay of the land. She was observant of these things. Yes. Yes. Right. Yes. See, ideally, even near the Samadhi, we should follow the same pattern as at the Matrimandir. That we should be able to keep some space, some time for preventing at least the influx of casual tourists. It's not really there. The best that is there is in the evenings, because that time the tourists don't come, at least the busloads don't come. But we don't have that kind of separation. And it is sad that at some point about 20 years ago, there were people from within the ashram who asked the government of Pondicherry and Tamil Nadu to put the ashram on the tourist map, in the tourist route, so that these buses would come. And I remember feeling deeply distressed when the first loads started coming in this way, and the dilution was so palpable. And then there was one other person, he was involved in the administration at that point, who actually made this very stupid comment and ridiculous. He said something like, "Oh, if even one person among thousands is touched, then it is worth it." No, it's not worth it. the dilution is not worth it. The loss for the community who is seeking to realize and manifest something different, that loss is not worth it. Just for one person being touched by what? Momentarily he felt a peace, he went back to his old life, nothing changes. That's not worth it. And those who are meant to come, who have the opening and sensitivity, will come anyway, as it has always been happening. And they will come because they are led by the inner being. And they will recognize when they come. We don't need that dilution. But now it's difficult to reverse things once they have been taken to this form. The government of Pondicherry makes these popular statements: come and visit world famous Sri Aurobindo Ashram and Matri Mandir. It's not a place for visiting, it's not a museum, but well, you can't avoid it.
Now they started trekking also.
Okay.
Canyon trekking. With the latest in IT.
Right.
No,
But I suppose-
maybe we should go with that.
We should.
Except that the tourists and ask for lots of money, so then the amount of people coming will be less.
Yes, I suppose. There are ways to deal with it. But anyway, we'll have to find ways. The main thing for me is this: we need to make a conscious effort as a community to preserve and hold these vibrations, especially the densification to the most material level of the spiritual vibration. It is something unique which Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have established here, because the goal includes transformation of the physical consciousness. It is not the case in all spiritual centers, because in many of them the goal is liberation from matter and the vibrations are very different. Here the goal being this: they've created something which constantly is pressing to reach all the way into the most material part. And Mother mentions this. She says in one of the classes to the students, she says, most of you would not be conscious, but around the ashram, in the physical space around the ashram, there is a certain concentration, almost a material concentration of energies. And if you can become conscious of that, it can be a great help, she said. But it's been created for a purpose.
It is very, very important for the said when one body realizes everybody is possible. Fighting with
Yes,
the
yes.
friend, we have a very, very
Yes.
big question. For the said, I do, you do.
Right,
That's all. It's
right.
the same substance.
Yes. Yes, on another level, when we look at it, the fact that all of us are, in a sense, representatives of the earth substance. So even if one human being is able to embody that, it becomes possible for everybody to embody. But of course, the work needs to be done. And that is what the Mother did. Because she did it in her physical body, therefore today it becomes possible for all of us to do it much more easily.
Was the same in 1962, after 50 years, I come back. But there,
Right. Yes. 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 Right.
I tell you, when you have recently lot of experience with not all the opinion, but in lot, maybe 40, 45, was a kid. What is this in the body? Come on.
Yes. For us to receive her physical vibrations in our own physical body is really the process of transformation. Yes.